Thank you to I4 for the presentation earlier. I4, here's your blue M&Ms for later on. There you go. There's no sign of my tiger shark, though, is there? No, yeah, they always say that, yeah. So, thanks all for coming here. There are more people here than I thought. It's all going to be absolutely fine if no one looks directly at me. So I'm here to talk about the Thoughtworks Technology Radar. It's something we put out twice a year. As John said, this is not even, we said like middle of February, everybody. It's going to be in like June, because I've got to write half this thing and I haven't got around to it yet. So you're seeing a very early draft, and I focus on the things I wanted to talk about, because as you'll find out, we're quite opinionated. I have also exported it straight from Keynote into a PowerPoint format and haven't actually loaded it into PowerPoint, so it might not work. So if anything goes wrong, it's not my fault. It's John's fault. So I work for Thoughtworks, as John said. We're an IT consultancy. Well, we've got offices here in London. We've got 23 offices worldwide right now. We're in the process of opening an African office, which is very interesting, very exciting. About 2,000 people worldwide. We basically do custom software delivery. That's what we do. We're also, our founder is insane. So if you do meet him, say hi from me. Don't know who I am. But we do some really interesting stuff. We sponsor quite a few community events in London. We are also hiring. I don't mean to take any money from John. I don't know, I can't believe I thought input. You must be having a slide in there. I did offer. But anyway, we are hiring. So around the corner, we're hiring. That's great. That's good. Look at this. I do this all day. Okay, I think there's one slide. I didn't say I wouldn't come back to it a lot. That's fine. So the key thing is, who am I? My name is Sam Newman. I am not that guy from the Flight of the Conchords. I do know all the lyrics to Sugar Lumps, but I'm not him, and I'm not the other guy either. I'm actually a principal consultant at Thoughtworks, which basically means I've been there so long they've given me an important title. And in practice, I run the continuous delivery practice for Europe, which basically means I go around talking about how great Jess's book is. And basically all the stuff I4 did, he's done my job for me, right? So I'm just going to trot I4's presentation around all of Europe right now. So if you're going to talk about continuous delivery, talk to I4 because he knows more than I do, as is clear from the presentation. And I don't get any percentages of Jess's book. In practice, I work a lot with clients who are moving towards continuous delivery and also working towards cloud adoption. My background is I'm a tech lead. I sit there and I cut code. That's kind of pretty much what I do. I'm now on a thing called the Technical Advisory Board for Thoughtworks. So it's about 12 of us that meet. We meet actually every couple of weeks and talk about what's happening in emerging trends. We're as close as makes no difference as the office of the technical officer of Thoughtworks. So we give guidance and advice about emerging trends that are coming up. And one of the things that the guys did before I joined was sort of come up with this idea of a radar, which is thinking about, you know, what is it that's really interesting to us? And by us, I don't mean us as Thoughtworks, because if you've met, there's a few Thoughtworkers scattered around. The idea that we somehow sing with one voice is kind of, you know, crazy. If you get two Thoughtworkers in a room, you've got three conflicting opinions. So very much the radar is what we in the room thought at the time. And it's a very, very opinionated view of technology and about what we think is very important. We've been really impressed, actually, by how interested people are, and I was talking to John about this earlier, and I think it's just that there's so much stuff going on that having some mechanism of filtering this down is useful for people. Okay, where should I focus my attention? Maybe in my career, maybe in my enterprise. The unfortunate thing for you lot is that you're choosing the filter of me. And I'm not necessarily a good judge of anything. So I have actually filtered the filter down to what I wanted to talk about today. So we're going to see how that works out for you. The full radar, there's a radar out from the last year. You can get it. It's good. There's good stuff in there. The next radar is probably going to be out more like March. But it's good stuff even. And what we tend to do over the period of the radar is there's things that interest us now, and we talk about them. And then when they move, we talk about them again. But if we don't have anything new to say, we take it off. So actually, there's a good turnover of new items coming up on that. And we kind of try and assess how important this technology might be, this thing, this technique, this tool. We actually have this whole sort of categorization system. It looks great. There's obviously like a whole load of us that play way too many computer games in this, right? You know. This is like a sort of threat indicator. This is like a World of Warcrafty thing going on. Hi, James, out there in the back. So this is all these people. So what we've kind of got is the 4 kind of general categories of technology that we find interesting. So the whole list around techniques and some of the stuff that Eiffel's talking about as CD fall under that purview. A lot of stuff around tools. So a lot of stuff about languages and platforms. The really interesting thing about languages is it's something that the industry as a whole doesn't tend to talk about that much. We're much more interested in talking about tools and platforms and APIs, but we actually think that if you're thinking about real step change in productivity, it's the languages is actually the most interesting field at the moment. So when we're thinking about these, we're thinking about them in these sort of categorization, and we're also thinking about them in terms of where they are, these sorts of, where is it on the radar? I'm going to talk through those levels. So we've got this level on the outside. I didn't take the bullets out, I apologize. We've got hold, which means proceed with caution. So items in the hold ring, we are saying if you're currently doing something with this technology, you should really think again if that's the best use of your time. If you're about to embark on using technology in the hold ring, it might not be the best use of your time, and you might want to think again about it. Again, this is a very, very opinionated view of technology, and there are going to be lots of people out there that I might put a couple of things I might talk about in hold that you're not going to like me for. Kind of don't care. That's all right. I've had a couple of beers by now. It's fine. We've got the assess ring. And this is stuff where, we tend to hang out on the bleeding edge. This is stuff that's going to be really, really interesting stuff that's coming in. And this is like, if you're looking for real edge over your competition, this might be where you want to be looking. Now, for us, we kind of see ourselves as being one ring out from where our clients are. So this is where we spend a lot of our time doing our thinking. What are the next things that we can bring in take to our customers that are going to be a real competitive edge? Once things make it into trial, this is where we have used them ourselves. For us to put anything in trial means we have used it on a few projects and can vouch for it. But it might not be the right thing for you right now, but you should really be looking at it. This is where you should be, we have vetted this stuff here. And the kind of a nice way to think about it is the technology that appears here is things that if it's new to you, think about where you can use it in your organization, but in such a way that you can manage the risk. So, for example, if it's some new, message framework out there, maybe you think, oh, these guys think it's good. I might not use it on my most mission-critical system. I might try it somewhere else first. And adopt is stuff right in the center. For it to get here, if you don't use this technology where it's appropriate, we will take the mick out of you down the pub, right? Because it's just like, you're not doing that, really? I mean, this would be like, there's this, you should be crazy. You've got to use this stuff, right? That's our view, right? Things in the middle, it takes a lot of work for these things to get in the middle. And there's an extent to which it's opinionated, but it's also an extent to which this reflects the advice that we give our clients. So I'm going to talk about basically about 8 things around the radar. And in total, we've got like about 60 things in here. So I always try and limit it down when I talk about these things. And these are things that interest me. And I think these are things that might have a resonance if you're looking at the wider community, the IT community in and around the London area. So it might be good if those of you thinking about growing your career or stretching yourselves in new and interesting ways, or joining Thoughtworks. We can look at techniques first. And techniques is kind of an open phase. I mean, traditionally, Thoughtworks was seen as the agile company, and people saw us much more for our techniques about agile, it's the TDDs, the continuous integration type things. So the first one I'm going to talk about actually is a really interesting one we've been using a lot recently, which is around this thing called embedded microcontainers. I would imagine a lot of you out there have worked. How many are actually out there who are in Java shops? Have a show of hands, maybe? Java shops, maybe? That's actually quite low. It's about sort of 30%, 40% of you, maybe. Now, a lot of you probably are deploying and taking your applications, bundling them up as WAR files, and deploying them into something nice and light and nimble, like a Jetty container, or something incredibly slow and buggy, like WebFear, where you just give like half of your soul to IBM or whoever it is. And I bet you guys get huge amounts of features, don't you, when you deploy into those containers. They're awesome things, and you always think every day, oh, I'm really glad we've got WebFear. I think that's the best thing ever. It's the best use of my time to take my lovingly crafted application and bundle it up and then put it in the hands of some vendor who doesn't really understand what it is I'm trying to do. So actually, we've been doing a lot of work where we have just taken the whole container out of the picture. What are containers? Why do they give us value? What is it I get from running in a J2E servlet container? I get things like clustering support. So great, I want to take a web application and the web, which is inherently stateless, and make a stateful back end and then have to do a clustering. So then I have to put a lot of money and give it to like WebLogic or WebSphere. That's not value. I get control via JMX. How many operations teams out there actually do any monitoring or control via JMX? Some do, but a lot don't. So a lot of the work we're doing around microcontainers are saying, well, what's wrong with the main method? So running embedded Jetty containers, embedded, say, simple web containers, simple web being designed for running in an embedded mode. The really interesting thing is, having worked with some operations people in this area, is when you give them an executable that they run that works on the port, and that's all they need to know or deal with, they actually find it much easier to support if there was just like a Unix admin. Oh, so I go to /etc/init.d and I run a script and it starts up, and I turn it off and it shuts down. As opposed to, yes, and now you know how to run your box, you've now got to go and get some WebLogic certification. So this is really popular. Really small, little applications with an embedded servlet engine inside it. You just fire them up. No need for a web XML, maybe just a main method and code. Works really, really well. And if you're interested in this, take a look at Jetty Embedded, take a look at Simple Web, which is designed for this sort of thing. And actually, question, what value do I get from a WebLogic, from a WebSphere? Does it really give me anything I actually need? So that's the kind of thing. So we put this in trial, which means we're using this in a few projects, a couple of projects actually in the UK. I would be surprised if we're not shifting this into adopt in the next 6 months. The other one that's really interesting that I'm kind of keen on is out-of-container testing. So iFor talked a lot about automated testing. We've done a lot of work in this space. One of the tools we created many years ago was a tool called Selenium, which actually allows you to drive a browser. So you can actually bring up your application, you can bring up a browser, and you can actually host some Java that talks JavaScript over a protocol called Celanese that then talks to your browser, that then talks to your application, but you nonetheless drive your application through a real browser mimicking user behavior. Now that's a fantastic thing to do, and it's great, but it's kind of slow, right? It's slow because you're bringing up the browser. It's slow because you're bringing up a web server and you're talking over sockets. Now, some of the work done recently around the Selenium 2, which is actually kind of the original was called WebDriver testing tool done by Simon Stewart, who's an ex-Thought worker now at Google, became Selenium 2. One of the nice things in there was the idea that you could define your tests and run them against a fake browser and use effectively HTML unit. What that meant was you still could talk in terms of clicking boxes, looking at check boxes, but you didn't need a full browser infrastructure to run. That's a good thing to do. And certainly for those tests where you don't need to worry too much about lots of heavyweight JavaScript rendering that might differ from one browser to the next, you could then nonetheless get a lot of speed and a lot of certainty on it. However, you're still bringing up a server, you're still talking over a socket. There might be some Python guys in the room. There's a thing called WSGI, which is the low-level Python web API, and you can actually drive tests directly at the API. So if you're a Django programmer, you can effectively run end-to-end tests without ever starting a server stack. And they run very, very fast. What we've been doing recently is a lot of work both in the .NET and in the Java and the Scala space to allow you to do the same things. And what we effectively do is we take an embedded Jetty container, and actually we drive it at the API level. We never start the server properly. We never go via a socket. And it means that we can run our fake browser tests probably 10 to 100 times faster than running them through a browser. If you're interested in the Java Scala space, there's an open source project called Improc Tester, and the author of that, Alex Harrin, is a thought worker, and he's got a .NET project similarly that allows you to drive a whole sort of end-to-end HTTP connection on a .NET stack without ever starting IIS. So it's a real boon for people that want to do the testing, but are worried about the overhead of waiting for all these things. It doesn't replace the need to have some tests that run in the browser, but it gives you a decision about where you run these. So it's very, very cool stuff. One project I was on, we were running around 50 end-to-end sort of tests. We were using Twist, one of our tools, was driving Selenium. We had about 50 browser tests, and in the same time, we could run 500 out-of-container tests. So, you know, in terms of coverage and certainty, it's a really interesting space. Again, I'll be very surprised. I think anything stopping this moving in is that getting the tool support a bit more robust. But Alex Harron stuff, so look for InProc Tester on GitHub and look for Alex Harron on GitHub, and his projects are really interesting in this space. Looking at tools now. First one we've got up, I can't remember what I put down now. Here we go, this will be interesting. Maven, hold, yes. Thought I'd put something controversial in here. Maven, who's using Maven? Put your hands up, that's fine. We're using Maven on some projects, it's okay. Yeah, I know you're using Maven. Maven on the whole, proceed with caution. What does this mean? Does it mean you're stupid for using it? Not quite. Maven has some very good capabilities in the form that it does sort of convention-based build systems well. The problem in the Ant world was you sit there, and every time, all I want to do is compile some Java code. I've got to write XML, which already was a mistake. But I've got to write the same, all I'm doing is compiling code. Maven said, no, I'll do all that for you. The convention-based build system is a good thing. I have no problem with that. The problem comes with the sort of glass ceilings that are associated with Maven. When you start trying to do something out of the ordinary, the number of different ways in which it basically does nasty things to you, horrible, you know, excruciatingly painful, awful things. And and that's one problem, that the convention-based build system has some ceilings that stop you just stepping out of the ordinary. Your directory structure is different because you're working on a long greenfield project. Oh, well, you're going to have some issues. You want to separate your fast build, your fast test step from your slow build step. Well, that's going to be an issue. But probably the biggest problem, and specifically when you're thinking about continuous delivery, I thought was earlier, one of the core drivers about continuous delivery is actually having reproducible builds. I need to be able to automate all of my build together and pull in all the components I want and get it out. The way that Maven promotes pulling together your dependencies is via this mechanism called the snapshot dependency. The snapshot dependency means that when you've created a binary artifact with some snapshot dependencies, you will never be able to reproduce that build ever again, unless by chance, none of the transitive dependencies have ever changed. That's a problem. So you then the only choice you've got is to shift to being really explicit about all your version dependencies, and then it stops being really a developer boon. This is a problem, and Maven does not have an answer to the reproducible build problem. There's a guy, if you look at there's a thing called the release plugin that gets you about 80% of the way there, but doesn't quite finish the job. There's a guy who's written a 3-part blog post, whose name escapes me, trying to deal with that specific issue. And it's for those two reasons, the convention-based build good, glass ceiling bad, and the dependency issue and the reproducible build issue, why we say really think about this. A project recently where I used Maven, we used Maven for the convention-based build, but hid it behind another wrapper. We actually hid it behind a Fabric wrapper to do the build stuff, but everything else we did some other way to actually limit how much stuff we're trying to do with it. I've never felt the need to generate a website via Maven, for example. Yes, it's great, I can do it. No, I've never needed to do it. So hold. Again, this is opinionated, it's what we in the room think, but you know, we're right, that's fine. You can argue about this later, it's fine. If you want to just have a laugh, Jez has fights with people all the time on the mailing lists about it, about Maven list. And some people get it, some people don't. And I think it's if you've been through the pain, you know of what I speak. Next one. Polyglot persistence. So actually, Martin has a book coming out with Pramod. So I've again touched on the challenges around databases and handling databases in terms of automated deployment, in terms of managing change. So Pramod with Scott Ambler wrote a book called Refactoring Databases, Evolutionary Database Design, or something along those lines. It's definitely the only book around any of this fact. How do you refactor databases? How do you manage those changes? So it's definitely worth a read if you're a data-intensive organization that wants to move towards frequent releases around that stack. One of the patterns outlined, we actually wrote as a tool, myself and a couple of colleagues, when we were working with The Guardian, we wrote a tool called DB Deploy, which helps around this space. But anyway, Pramod was the big guy behind it. And obviously, Martin Fowler is our chief scientist, and he spends a lot of time talking about what we do. Now, they're actually working on a book right now on this subject. NoSQL is a very, very big hot topic at the moment. And there is an awful lot of hot air. There are different vendors coming to the market with their own solutions. Oh, it's graph databases are best. Oh, it's document databases. No, you've got to have a key value store. You've got to be web scale. I don't know what web scale means. You've got to be web scale. There's all this stuff coming out. So what Martin and Pramod are doing is actually trying to look at what are the different types of databases. Why are they interesting to you? What are the different use cases in which one is interesting over another? So Martin's blogged recently around sort of aggregate-oriented databases, really looking at why document-oriented databases give you such a productivity benefit over relational databases from a developer point of view. But polyglot persistence is really the way of understanding what your use case is for the data you are using and what data storage technology is most applicable, rather than adopting a one-size-fits-all. Going from ditching all of your relational databases and going only to document-oriented databases would be as wrong as sticking with what you've got. Look at and analyze and understand your current usage. What is it you're trying to achieve? What's the problem you've got? And then look out there at the different databases that might work for you. So Martin and Pramod's book will be out this year, probably, hopefully by June. But this is the understand, and Martin's got some blogs on his Blicky about this. So it is, very much, what is your use case? Where do you understand it? Personally, I'm a huge fan of Neo4j. If I wasn't here today, I'd be at the Neo4j user group, but I'm not. So yeah, those technologies are definitely worth a look. So that's something to look out for on the radar. On that side, beyond the, some of those databases talk a lot more about the ability to scale and avoid the sharding problems, or really, I think the biggest impact for us as a developer community is developer productivity. It's for most of the NeoSQL databases that are being considered seriously, it's a developer productivity is noticeable, is significantly noticeable over and above using relational databases. And this is actually, in some ways, in some domains, a much bigger deal than, say, a shift in language. Okay, we're on to platforms. I'm running out of time. I'm going too fast. Am I going too fast, John?
Yeah, you are, okay.
That's fine. Okay, good. More time for beer. So platforms. Assist, all Linux containers. So now I've gone all DevOpsy on you. So part of what I deal with as part of my continuous delivery practice is working a lot in the DevOps space. And traditionally, I cover the cloud stuff. So I do an awful lot of work with things like Amazon. I do an awful lot of work with Amazon. One of the challenges when you're trying to move to fully automated deployment is, and it's this sort of continuous delivery approach, is you need more environments, because you've got to get them into environments with different setups and you've got to test them in different ways. Now, traditionally, racking up kit is expensive and takes a long time. So the lead times are long. So actually you had a lot of people moving, a lot of our clients adopting things like Amazon because I suddenly want to do this CI thing and I want to do a bit of automated testing, but oh look, I can't get my environments created fast enough, and the performance testing is a big one here. And so they start moving to Amazon to satisfy that need. The issue though is that as good as those services are, they're not free and they're not cheap. And a lot of the time, what you actually just need are sealed machine-like things. Amazon restrict how much they'll only let you make a box so small or a box so large. You're fairly constrained, actually, in what you can do. A lot of people, and us included, we've been developing an internal development platform for our internal use that can automatically provision things like Go instances and Mingle and all this sort of stuff. We've been using a lot of these things called Linux containers. Now, with traditional VM technology, you've got, say, some host hypervisor, and you run these VMs within it, and that hypervisor manages tunneling things through and all this sort of stuff. Spinning up those VMs is not that fast, and there is there's a bit of an overhead, although the Linux stuff is the KVM and Zen are pretty good at actually handling that in an efficient way. Linux containers are effectively cheroots on steroids, is one of the taglines. They allow you to actually take an existing operating system and just partition it up in a much more lightweight way than a VM. So you can take a big, say, I don't know, Ubuntu box, run LXC on it, and you could maybe bring up, say, 500 VMs on one machine. And they're all fairly hermetically sealed environments, and they can be spun up in seconds. One of the nice things is, I mean, one of the things that I was talking about was when you're doing your continuous delivery, you can't automate bringing up environments. There's a library called libvirt, which allows you to manage Zen and KVM virtual machines. It also allows you to manage these things. Atlassian have just launched their cloud offering for Jira. They use Linux containers so that a different Jira instance gets its own little container on a box. These things are really, really fast and are very, very cool if you're in the business of trying to work out how to best use your hardware. And actually, you know, we've certainly seen some cases in which running these things on top of Amazon actually gets you a bit more cost effective in how you're using your hardware. So very, very cool stuff. Very nerdy, really nerdy, but very, very cool. So if you want to find out, search for Linux containers, search for LXC. Their presentation from Atlassian, I think, is available. I think it's Josh Graham, another ex-Thoughtworks presentation, but do take a look at that, and it talks a bit more about how they're using it. We've been using it. We've been very, very impressed. So definitely something worth looking at if what you're trying to do is say, how can I take my hardware and make more use of it to deliver the environments I need? Another issue in this is domain-specific paths. This is one of mine, that's why I'm talking about it. We were talking earlier about infrastructure automation, the how do I get my application onto a machine? Well, part of that is about making that machine reflect what I expect it needs to reflect. What version of Apache has it got? What's the configuration file? Where is that configuration file? What users are on that box? What groups are those users in? What ports are open on my firewall? And traditionally, this was a manual task. You would have some sysadmin who'd log into the box and would hack away for a bit, and they'd get the box set up, and then you'd put your software on it, and then you'd hope to hell that box never died, because you wouldn't be able to recreate it. You know, every box is a snowflake. And then this tool came along called CF Engine, and there were lots of tools around managing infrastructure in the commercial space, but there's a really interesting one, was a tool called CF Engine that actually tried to represent the state of a machine as a piece of code. So I'm going to make a declaration about how that box looks. This box will have Apache on it. It will have a user called Bob. That Bob will be in a group called Bob group. And when you ran that script, it would make the box look like that. If the box already looked like that, nothing would happen. Now, CF Engine got a bit long in the tooth and never really had that much of an impact, but it's covered in a chapter on the web operations book called Infrastructure as Code. It's worth reading to get an understanding about the importance of what it's talking about. The two popular tools that have taken those ideas onto the next level is Chef, that was written by a bunch of Amazon guys that worked on EC2, they went off to do their own thing, and Puppet. They are both open source tools, both backed by commercial companies. Our view is you should, that while they have different capabilities, you should use them, basically. For Linux-based stuff, it's just a no-brainer. Now, that's kind of low-level infrastructure automation. How can I bring a box into being? But let's think about stuff we talked about before, with Linux containers and these libraries you can now run to bring boxes up. If I'm on Amazon, I can code to a Botto on Python or Fog on Ruby, and I can bring up my hosts. I can now run a Chef or a Puppet, and with those boxes, go to that host and say, right, now put this user on it, put this app server on it, and then I can deploy my application on top. So I've got all the building blocks for fully automated provisioning of entire environments, and this is stuff we're doing today for our clients. Really interesting thing starts happening with those low-level building blocks, though. If you think about a platform as a service, you know, it's something that's fairly high level, it's fairly abstract. Deploy this application and go make it work. But what we're starting to see is the more you automate your infrastructure, the more you automate provisioning of your environments and configuring those boxes, the more you're effectively creating a platform as a service that's specific to your problem space. It's a very, you know, it's a really interesting space. And I think this is the reason it's out on a set is because we're still trying to get up to grips with the patterns. We know that Chef and Puppet kind of do similar things, but we're kind of not sure what to call those things. We don't have a language for what they are. And that's still where this is emerging. But we think this is a very interesting emerging space. Now, I would urge you, if Puppet and Chef were on my radar here, they would be in trial to adopt if you're on a Linux platform. You should, if you're not on a Linux-based platform and you're not looking at Puppet or Chef, you're crazy. I'm just saying that now. You really, really should. On the Windows platform, we've got them on Assess. because they are improving their Windows support. A lot of people are making a lot of mileage using Puppet or Chef to call back down to PowerShell, which is a very, very powerful scripting system for Windows. It was written by, well, I think it came out of the Haskell guys that Microsoft hired years ago. So it's definitely from the Windows space, yeah, but if you're in the Linux space, get your ops guys to look at Chef and Puppet, because that's where all the cool hotness is. This is where you're getting your reproducible system. This is where you're getting your, I don't care if a box goes down because I can reprovision it in 5 minutes thing. So definitely look at those tools. This is more about the high-level concepts, how do you build a system where you can just take your application, throw it out there, and it just works. And this is the new sort of bleeding edge stuff. Languages. Scala, trial. So trial means we're doing it, right? Yeah, we have a very large Scala project actually here in London. Again, we had Java people, we had about sort of 40%-ish. There's a comment doing the rounds that Scala is the COBOL of the 21st century, right? And you know, I started off at university. I had a fairly good uni, despite it being a polytechnic. I did some functional programming, did some Haskell and Smalltalk and things, but they made me learn Java. 092 as it was. Oh, that's all right, it's better than C++, you know, no garbage collection. And it is, and it's great, and it's everywhere, right? And it's everywhere because it's fairly easy to pick up and it's fairly easy to learn. The problem that most of my lot have with Scala, with Java rather, is it's not terribly expressive. I've got a problem, a solution that I want to specify, and I've got this boilerplate crap coming up. Public void, blah, blah, blah. I've got to specify my types everywhere. All this sort of stuff going on. And yes, it's kind of easy-ish to use, but it's very constraining, especially when you're seeing people do all kinds of cool stuff with Ruby. All these Ruby script kiddies out there having lots of fun. Scala's actually is primarily born out of academia. Adetsky, who's behind the language, is the guy that came up with the Java generic system. So if you're not a fan of the Java generic system, you might not be a fan of Scala. You know, I'm just saying. But nonetheless, it does allow you to take what you know about Java, pick up a new language, and actually you can use Scala, kind of like how you use Java. Like, I mean, as Graham Tackett from The Guardian put it, you know, using it like Java without semicolons. And that's an interesting way of adopting that. And over time, you can bring in more and more language features. The project we've got, we're working with a client, and they were concerned they're moving from a Java place to trying to bring them in. And one of the things we actually solved them on were, well, look, in the city, you know, you're competing against banks and all these other sorts of people. What is it that how are you going to attract people in? Maybe this is a way for you to attract people into your company. But we kind of went on a journey with them where we took Scala and we used it like Java. And actually you probably become a little bit less productive because the tool support's not as good. But then they started mixing in a couple of new language capabilities here and going on that adoption path, and they now are significantly more productive than they were. And they reckon the tipping point was a few weeks before they were more productive, even with the problems around the tool chain. Couple of caveats. Scala has a huge number of language features. It is an object-oriented language that's arguably a more powerful object-oriented language than Java. It also has functional aspects as well in there. You can kind of come up, if you want to, with this sort of hybrid monster, functional object-oriented thing with generics, and then your head explodes. There's an extent to which, you know, I always feel it feels to me a little bit like C++, so you have to be wary. So I think you need to sort of pick and mix what features you use, but nonetheless, we like the language, we think it's more productive than Java, and actually I think it's a good path for people moving from Java. If you're on the .NET stack, well, you've got C#, so don't complain. It's a great language. So Microsoft's done some great stuff with the .NET stack, F# and C# being amongst them. So you're not missing out by not having Scala, right? It's the same thing. But do take a look. Nice thing is that you can, because it has interop, you can try a library in Scala. And then if it doesn't work out, well, you can just call it like an API. You don't have to be bedded into it. But I think it's worth looking at, I really do. And I think for those of you trying to attract people into your organizations, especially full-time people, talking about, we're doing this really cool, interesting technology, might be a way to offset competition from the financial industry if they can offer better salaries for a J2EE Oracle programmer. And I think the key thing is you may well be attracting people more passionate about the technology as well. Something to look at. I actually think Scala is better than Java. However, I think Clojure is way better. So I'm really annoyed that, so while we've got Scala on trial, we've only got Clojure out on assess right now. Clojure's my baby. I'm very, very passionate about it. So of course, now I talk about it being a Lisp and everyone goes to sleep. Clojure's really interesting. It's a purely functional language. It is based on Lisp. It runs on the JVM. Performance-wise, right now the new version's on par with what Scala can achieve. And it's got great Emacs support. So again, it's appealing to my inner geek. One of the really interesting things is as a Lisp, the underlying language is actually built from about 11 underlying special concepts that have to be written in terms of bytecode. And everything else is defined in terms of the language itself, which seems quite geeky, because you can run through core.clj and see the language creating itself. One of the benefits, though, is it means it's ported already to the .NET CLR. And it's pretty much feature parity. It's also now been ported to the JavaScript runtime. So ClojureScript is a fully working Clojure implementation running on JavaScript. It can run in your browser. It can run Node.js. So you've got a language that's now portable across these great platforms. It's awesome stuff. So this, for me, is really interesting because it's actually like Scala's kind of saying the way you used to create your programs was kind of OK, but you needed some more bells and whistles. So I'm going to give you some more language features. But Rich Hickey, who's the main guy behind Clojure, he's one of these guys that's like the brain the size of a small planet, basically says, no, everything you're doing right now, your programs, is completely wrong. You don't know how to manage state, you don't know how to manage identity, and you can't be trusted to do anything with concurrency. So I'm going to do it all for you. And he's kind of right. There's a really interesting video on Steza. If you're interested in this space at all, and even if you're not, but want your mind blown a little bit, there's a video he does about state and identity, where he gets to the crux of so many of the issues that we now have with Java programs. When I moved from C to Java, the big win for me was not having to do memory management. But the problems I get myself into with Java programs, when I saw the Rich Hickey video talking about state and identity, the challenges around concurrency, is really when I started to understand the problems of the programs I was now writing. So looking at that, just watch those videos and they're kind of really interesting. He does this amazing one, actually, which is all about perception and light. And I don't want to get into it, it's a big thing. He's got big hair as well, it's great. So actually, I think there was the pragmatic programmer said you should try and learn a new language every year. And I think they were kind of right, but also kind of wrong, because you could just learn lots of languages like one you already know, right? You could go from, well, Java to C#, it's not that much of a bump. And yes, you've got to learn the ecosystem. So I went for something that was very, very different from how Java works, from how Scala works. Fundamentally, there's a real way of just going. So my mind is officially freaked on this thing, and I think it's the best thing ever. So do look at it. It does look insane, but it does work. Trust me on this. So I would say they've got a whole channel of videos on Blip TV. Now the Scala community, there's a Scala community in London. There's a very vibrant Clojure community. They meet at Skills Matter once a month. Also once a month, we have a thing called the Clojure Dojo that we host at our offices. So if you're interested in seeing what Clojure looks like, search for Clojure Dojo. You can't come this week or next week because we're full, but every month we come. So log onto the website, you can sign up, come along and just see what it looks like. And hopefully there'll be a Clojure conference sometime in the first half of the year. And Skills Matter run user events for both of these groups. So if you're interested in either thing, come along to those events, meet the people, see what they're doing and how they're working. And if you're looking, to stretch yourself in your career, think about learning one of these two languages. If you're thinking about making yourselves more attractive, maybe start doing these languages, right? It might make it easier for you to hire people. But we're very, kind of interesting inside the tab, I think there's more people that want Clojure to win, but we know it's easier to get people into Scala from the Java community. So just one data point. So I've rattled through that deck very quickly on the account of not having done it enough prep. But nonetheless, thank you for your attention. We are hiring. And I work for Thoughtworks, and here's my Twitter thing so you can photograph pictures and question whether or not I'm still sober or not. Have we got time for questions, John?
Yeah, a few questions.
You sure?
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? We don't have any questions. You can't ask me a question. Oh, there's a question back there.
Maybe you providing an alternative to Maven.
Oh, an alternative to Maven. Oh, that's a good question. So it's really interesting because in the closure space, for example, there's a build tool called Linegan and a tool called Cake. They actually both use Maven under the hood. I think SBT, which is a Scala tool, I think stands for Simple Build Tool, but it's not a simple build tool. I think they use Maven under the hood. There's parts of Maven that I think are good, but I think you need to hide it. I think the closest thing you're going to come to approximating the good stuff it does, which is the convention-based build, would be a library of ants macros plus Ivy, right? And this is the thing, like when we said hold means proceed at risk. I think understand what it's good for and what it's bad for. So, for example, in my most recent project, the build process is a Fabric script, which Fabric is a little Python API that just is a basic command on dispatcher. It builds using Maven. All of our test processes there just run the jar files that Maven creates to avoid the challenges it has around handling different types of test processes. So I would say, go into it, but be hesitant about putting too much into it, and understand the implications of snapshot dependencies. Because if you don't, and you have any compliance issues, you are screwed. But do look into it and understand, and do some reading. If you do search for Maven release plugin problems, there's a 3-part post, it'll take you through why it could be an issue. Yeah?
What's your view on the future of Perl, and if you're going to advise another language to mix up with it for the future, what would you recommend?
So the question for the camera was about Perl and what I would advise. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because there's so many sysadmins, they know Bash or Perl. And I think it's kind of like, my concern with the Perl ecosystem is it's nowhere near as broad church as some of the other scripting languages that have some of the similar capabilities. And so I think it's going to suffer from not having as much love. I mean, I actually learned Perl before I learned Python. I think it depends the task you're looking at. I think the adoption from Perl to Python might feel more natural than Perl to Ruby, for example. And I think both communities are potentially larger than maybe the Perl community is. So I would suggest if you're looking for something that might have, say, richer API support, I would go there. But I think I'd also drive it based on your problem space. So, for example, if you're trying to do infrastructure automation around Amazon, then maybe the thing you do is look at the great APIs, so it's Botto and Fog. Which one speaks to you more? Maybe I'll pick the language around that API. I'm actually a Python guy. I love Python. It's awesome. But that's just, it speaks to me. So I don't think Perl is necessarily a bad language because of the language itself. I just think it's, there are other languages with similar capabilities in the space with better communities. And I'd say Ruby and Python. And I prefer Python because there's less Ruby on Rails script kiddies knocking around who are really annoying.
How do Python compare to Java or C#?
How's Python compared to Java or C#? Well, clearly it's better. Again, I said you were opinionated. It's really interesting, right? Because you go back about 10 years or so, and you look at the capability, you go back 5 years. Python is a really interesting, very, very good language. It never had Rails. If you think about all of those tools, there was some reason they became really popular. And now where we are, you can't separate necessarily the capabilities of the language. You have to take the language capabilities with the community it's in. The issue is there's no language out there with a better community of open source libraries than Java. I think C# has got better, but Java wins hands down. When you program on the Java stack, you are taking advantage of a huge array of APIs. And Jython, which actually I think would have been one way for Python to remain relevant on the JVM platform, has never been terribly on par compared to, say, JRuby. When we actively deploy Rails applications on JRuby because of the robustness of running on JVM as opposed to some of the Ruby deployment mechanisms. So again, there are some specific spaces. I mean, if I'm doing anything on the command line and I'm hacking around my log files, I go to Python. Spin-up time is key. The spin-up time for a JVM or a CLR kills you for a command line process. Python's all the way. I spoke to a number of people who are really interested in spin-up times for the virtual machines, so the JVM or the CLR spin-up times are too slow. A lot of those guys who are looking for something with some more advanced capabilities are actually looking at Node.js. Really, really quick spin-up times. One of the interesting things for Clojure is actually running Clojure programs for sort of scripting stuff in Node.js to get the really fast spin-up times, but the expressiveness of Clojure. So if I'm doing log processing, hacking around with stuff, I do a small amount of a bit of sed with some, a bit of sed stuff, right? And then I very quickly jump into Python. But if I'm building web apps, I like Django a lot, but I tend to veer more towards Java because I'm a bit happier there. So it's a bit horses for courses. Spin-up time is important for some people, though. Question at the back.
What do you think the chances of Java 8 turning up early enough to derail adoption of Scala and Clojure?
So the question was, what are the chances of Java 8 turning up quickly enough to derail the adoption of Scala or Clojure, or insert your language here? So I think the guys at Oracle have learned a bit of their lesson from Java 7. So I saw working implementations of Clojure on a JVM in 2007. There was no reason it took as long as it did for it to come out, other than arguing about syntax, and that killed the community. I think the ship sailed, honestly. I think it's just going to take, yes, there's going to be those guys that go from Fortran 77 to Fortran 90. I don't see it slowing it. I mean, I think, if anything, the 7 appears, oh, they're still releasing Java? Now, I would separate that out and say that one of the benefits of those things coming out is still the JVM itself. It doesn't invalidate the adoption of Scala or Clojure, doesn't invalidate the importance of the ecosystem of the JVM and of the libraries around it. I think, actually, I wouldn't, if you're interested in, say, the capabilities of Scala, for example, but can't wait for Java 8 and can't adopt Scala, I think there's a lot of mileage in looking in some of the functional libraries out there for Java right now that are really interesting. There's one called Totally Lazy by Dan Bodart, who's another ex-Thoughtworker, who's just really interesting functional type, higher order functions for Java. And to be honest with you, I'm thinking, what's going to come in Java 8 that I really care about? Some more Baroque syntax that's backwardsly compatible. I mean, personally, I'm over the whole thing. The ecosystem I'm passionate about. The ecosystem I think is important, but I think maybe for the more conservative part of the market, it's going to be useful. But even if Java 8 came out now, for many of the organizations, especially some of the guys you work with, and certainly some of our more conservative clients, it could be a year or two before it's certified for production use. So even once it comes out, you're looking at, what, a year before you're able to code in it day to day? I don't know. I think the horse has bolted on that one. But again, I would think that because I kind of want to steal the funky languages. So again, opinionated and unapologetic about the whole thing. Any other questions?
Yeah, what's your prediction of the future of Ruby, the language?
Picture in the future of Ruby as a language. I'm a fan. I like it. I think it's still doing very, very well. I think it's. Do you know what? I don't have any strong opinions one way or another. It's definitely got a future, no question. If you look at the 3 languages we use most inside Thoughtworks, it's Java, it's C#, and it's Ruby. There's a place for it. It's getting used very effectively. We do a lot of work. We're actually kind of as interested in support for Ruby on the JVM as much as anything. And I don't see any reason for it to go anywhere. I think it's a very good language. It's been interesting that I don't think it's ever had the killer library since Rails. But yeah, it's a good language. I definitely look at using it, and I think if you haven't already looked at it, I'd definitely take a look. It's a good language. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you. We're hiring.